All right, welcome to the New Moon Fireside for the Zarehemel Foundation. We're going into the fourth biblical month here, and we're very pleased to have a presentation tonight by my daughter, Zoe Erickson. She actually gave this presentation a year ago, a little more than a year ago, at the Restoration Torah Conference. But her talk was one of the ones that we had technical difficulties recording, and so we are having her redo it for the sake of recording, and besides, it's good to hear again from her anyway. So for those of you who did attend the Restoration Torah Conference, or even if you didn't and you're interested in hearing the things that the speakers said, whether you agree or disagree, those have been uploaded to YouTube and also to Rumble. So you can go ahead and check those out. And just a reminder that, as always, the speakers, both at the conference and also at these New Moon Firesides, represent their own ideas and not necessarily that of the Zarehemel Foundation or of any other organization. So without too much further introduction, I'm going to turn the time over to Zoe. Remember, we are recording this, so all of the everyone who's viewing it has been muted. If you do have questions or comments, please leave them in the chat, and Zoe will get to them, or at least some of them, perhaps anyway, towards the end of her presentation. And with that, I'm going to blow the shofar, and then I will turn the time over to Zoe Erickson. Hopefully you'll be able to hear this. Zoom sometimes filters out what they think is unwanted noises. So maybe this will be an unwanted noise, maybe a welcome noise. There we go. Hi, Zoe Erickson.
All right.
Loud.
It's loud. So here we are, I guess, redoing my talk from last year. So that you're all here. And I can start now. So I'm actually in front of my come on. Video. I just feel it's awkward to have them if I'm trying to talk, I don't want to have to worry about how I'm looking. Anyway, so my talk is about the times when Jesus used quotations from the Old Testament in response and rebuke to the Pharisees and the scribes. And it's been an interesting thing. I've added I wouldn't say a bunch more, but I've definitely added some since I gave this at the Restoration Torah Conference last year. And I suppose I should just start. All right, so our Messiah, Yeshua, Jesus Christ, knew the Old Testament inside and out. And this is evident by the frequency with which he quoted it, both as a source of wisdom and authority and as a weapon. Although there are many insights to be gained in the study of the times when he used it as a teaching tool, in this talk I will only be discussing the numerous times where he used it as a weapon. So Yeshua of Nazareth was a master of debate. When the religious leaders of the time, the scribes and the Pharisees, challenged him, hoping to ensnare him with his own words, he responded to them with the very thing from which they drew their power, which was the one thing which they could not credibly refute. So let us suppose for a moment that he had attempted to use logic and reason to dispute religious matters with the Pharisees. He could have argued that their man-made laws were irrational and it made no sense. He could have, but I imagine they would have scoffed at him, saying something along the lines of, well, the Lord created reason. He is above reason, for creation cannot rule over its creator. His statutes are sacred and binding, yet some might say that they are, to us, irrational. And who are you, a man, to imagine yourself capable of discerning the reasoning of the Lord? And so on and so forth. He would have been no threat, or at the most only a very minor one, to their monopoly on the religious, the religious power among the Jews at the time. Because his attacks would have come from an outside source, one which they and their followers considered invalid, at least in the context of religion. Or if you could suppose that he had tried to debate using Roman law as his weapon of choice. I think he would have been rebuffed in much the same fashion. If Yeshua had started to gain followers and started to gain traction, the rabbis could have called him a Roman in Jews' clothing, a man with no religious power or credibility beyond that of the Romans, and condemned his followers as lovers of other gods, gods which their fathers never knew. Had he argued against the Pharisees with his own philosophy, they could have said, "Behold, this man is mad, or else possessed of a demon. Pay him no heed, therefore, lest his blaspheming falsehoods blind your eyes and stop up your ears to the truth till they at length drag you down into the infernal pit." Indeed, they said something very like this in John 8:48, which reads, "Then answered the Jews and said unto him, Say we not well that thou art a Samaritan and hast a devil?" Now, I don't know which one of these would be the bigger insult, calling him a Samaritan or saying that he had a devil. See, the Samaritans and the Jews hated each other, and of course, being possessed of a devil is never a good thing either. But no, our Messiah was too wise to play such games with the scribes and Pharisees. He pulled the stones from the nearly forgotten but still vital foundation of their religious authority and used those same stones as weapons against them. He used the one thing which they could not shrug off or explain away satisfactorily. The very source from which their supposed authority came, the law, the prophets, and the writings, or what we now call collectively the Old Testament. The first time we see Christ use the Old Testament as a means of rebuke is in Matthew chapter 4. This is also Luke 4. Interestingly, on this occasion, he was not actually contending with the Pharisees, but rather with the devil himself. So Matthew 4, 1-4 reads, "Then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward and hungered. And when the tempter came to him, he said, If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread. But he answered and said, It is written, Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God." So one thing which I just need to say before I go on is that unless otherwise noted, all the quotations in my presentation are from the King James Version, and all of the emphasis is mine. So, of course, Jesus went out into the wilderness to fast for 40 days in preparation for the beginning of his ministry. After he had fasted for 40 days, of course, the devil came and began to tempt him, taunting him, begging him to show his power as the Son of God and turn the stones of the desert into bread to satisfy his hunger. So, in response, this quotation that Jesus says is directly from Deuteronomy 8, and the correlation is, at least in my mind, fascinating. So, Deuteronomy 8, 2-3 reads, and this is, well, I'll read it and then "And thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God led thee these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble thee and to prove thee, to know what was in thine heart, whether thou wouldst keep his commandments or no. And he humbled thee and suffered thee to hunger, and fed thee with manna, which thou knewest not, neither did thy fathers know, that he might make thee know that man doth not live by bread only, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of the Lord doth man live." So in Deuteronomy 8, Moses is talking to the children of Israel, and they are on the cusp of finally being allowed to enter the promised land after wandering in the wilderness for 40 years to purify them from all of the older generation, the people who had left their hearts behind in Egypt, even as their bodies were taken out of that place with great signs and marvelous wonders, and with the outstretched arm of God. Now, 40 in the scriptures is a significant number that pops up often, usually denoting trials or tests of one sort or of another. Some examples are, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights during the flood. Moses and Elijah fasted for 40 days each. Goliath mocked and taunted the Israelite soldiers before being dispatched through David. God, through Jonah, gave the people of Nineveh 40 days to repent, or else their city would be destroyed. And there are other examples as well. Jesus would have been well aware of that, and by quoting from this passage in the law, he was not only rebuking the devil, but drawing a parallel between his 40 days spent fasting in the wilderness and the 40 years spent wandering in the wilderness by the children of Israel. In contrast to the children of Israel, though, he took his trial, his purification, on himself willingly. Their trials and purification were involuntary, imposed on them as a punishment for an extremely embarrassing incident that took place at the base of Mount Sinai. Something about gold and a cow, I believe. So, and the other thing is that he succeeds where they fail in this. And it's very interesting because he is setting himself up as the perfect version of Israel. He is succeeding where they failed, and in this way, redeeming them. And there's also another very interesting. So, sorry, one moment. Okay. So one of the other interesting things that is part of this is there are several times where eating something leads to downfall. So one example is the prophet. Let's see, I believe he's from the southern kingdom, gets sent to the northern kingdom to prophesy against it, and then comes back, and he's not supposed to stop, but there's this other prophet who goes out and says, "Oh, I'm a prophet too. I've been, sent. I've been told by the Lord that you should come and eat with me, whatever." And so then the other prophet does and eats and drinks, and then ends up getting killed by a lion on his way because he disobeyed the commandment he received. So in this, not only is Jesus or Yeshua setting himself as the perfect version of Israel, but this is also, I believe, the redemption of Eve. So this is the seed of the woman who will crush the serpent's head. And, in the garden, the serpent says, "Eat this thing," right? And Eve does, and Adam does, and that was the fall. In this, the devil says, "Oh, you should turn these stones into bread and eat them." And this is a similar kind of temptation, and Jesus doesn't. So this is the redemption of not only Israel, but I feel like humanity more broadly. Okay, so moving on to the next bit of this exchange between Jesus and the devil. So the devil is well versed in the scriptures. So he knows all this stuff. Quoting loosely from C.S. Lewis from the Screwtape Letters, it says, I think it's from the Screwtape Letters, maybe not, never mind, but he says even the devils know who God is, and they fear him too. So there is nothing unknown. That's a weird way of putting it. But the devil knows the scriptures, and so he counters with a scripture quote of his own. So it says, "Then the devil taketh him up into the holy city, and setteth him on a pinnacle of the temple, and saith unto him, If thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down, for it is written." So this is a little tagline that I was almost considering naming my talk last year. So "for it is written" is the tagline for this is now a quotation from the Old Testament when it's in the New Testament. So "he shall give his angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against it." So the corresponding passage here is Psalm 91:11-12, which reads, "For he shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways. They shall bear thee up in their hands, lest thou dash thy foot against it." He, of course, was trying to lure Yeshua into tempting God, something which was expressly forbidden in Deuteronomy 6:16, which says, "You shall not tempt Yahovah your God as he tempted him in Massah." And of course, as he tempted him in Massah is referring to Exodus 17, where the children of Israel murmured against Yahovah because they had no water in the desert. Christ, of course, knew the commandment not to tempt Yahovah, however, and quoted that same passage from Deuteronomy to the devil. So it says, Jesus said unto him, "It is written again, Thou shalt not tempt Yahovah thy God." The devil seems to have given up trying to fight fire with fire then, and instead appealed to greed. This is Matthew 4:8-9. "Again, the devil taketh him up into an exceeding high mountain, and showeth him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them, and saith unto him, All these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. Then saith Jesus unto him, Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship Yahovah thy God, and him only shalt thou." So to fight this time, well, actually, I want to do a little side note. So in my original version of the talk, I was looking at some Bible commentaries in preparation for this last year. And one of the things that I found, which was interesting to me, was that this is the only place in the scriptures where somebody is essentially bribed to worship something. That's actually not true. And one obvious example is Matthias in Maccabees. Of course, there is the Greek officer sent by Antiochus Epiphanes with an altar, and he says, "Here, you're very respected in Modin. Take this pig, offer it on the altar to this pagan god, and you'll be given all these wealth and riches and honor. You'll be called friend of the king." And this is essentially a bribe for Matthias. So whatever that Bible commentary is was not accurate, but it is a kind of an interesting connection, I guess. All right, so to fight this temptation of all the kingdoms of the world, of course, the devil is the prince of this world, and he would have, I believe, actually had the power to do that. This is not just an empty promise, although perhaps he would not have come through on the promise, but it was definitely within the realm of possibility for this to be a real thing. Anyway, so okay, to fight this temptation, Christ did not lean on his own strength to try and keep the devil at bay, but turned once more to the law. So this is Matthew 4:10. Oh, there we go. Sorry. And then Jesus said unto him, "Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve." I guess my PowerPoint had a typo. Okay. So obviously this is from Deuteronomy 6:13. This is from the Septuagint, this quotation, which says, "Thou shalt fear Yahweh thy God, and him only shalt thou serve, and thou shalt cleave to him, and by his name thou shalt serve." So the passage concludes with the devil leaving and angels coming to minister to him, which is Matthew 4. So this is the first time Christ uses the Old Testament to rebuke anything that we have a record of. And of course, when I say that, I mean canonically, I have not done extensive research into New Testament Apocrypha, although I have done some, and so I could not say for certain whether there's something else in there, but this seems like a fairly decent point to start out from. All right, so the first time that Christ used the Old Testament to rebuke the rabbis that we have a record of happens several chapters later in Matthew 12. Here we'll go that. All right, so Christ was going through a field of grain on the Sabbath, and his disciples, being hungry, started to pick the ears and eat them. Okay. The Pharisees saw, and they tell him, "Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day." And that's Matthew 12:2. His reply was simple. He says, "Have you not read what David did when he was in hunger, and they that were with him? How he entered into the house of God, and did eat the shewbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them which were with him, but only for the priests. Or have you not read in the law, how that on the Sabbath day the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? But I say unto you, that in this place is one greater than the temple." All right. So a couple of things which are interesting here is we'll get to that a bit later. So the first part of his reply is, of course, a reference to the story recorded in 1 Samuel 21. David is fleeing from Saul and asks Ahimelech the priest for bread. Ahimelech has no bread on hand except for the shewbread which is reserved for the priest as per Leviticus 24:9. Despite this, Ahimelech gave the loaves to David and his men after inquiring about their ritual purity. There seems to be some debate as to whether this was a sin on the part of David or Ahimelech or both, but a closer look at Leviticus 24:9 may give us a clue as to whether it was or not. First reads, "And it, according to the shewbread, shall be Aaron's and his sons. They shall eat it in the holy place, for it is most holy unto him of the offerings of Jehovah made by fire by a perpetual fire." Now, while it's not worth noting that, it may be worth noting that while, one second, I need to figure out what this beeping is. Good? Okay. So it may be worth noting that while the shewbread shall be Aaron's, it says that the shewbread shall be Aaron's and his sons. It does not say that it will only be Aaron's and his sons. It might be reasonable to infer that the regular priests who were on duty, who were from Levi but not from Aaron, might be able to eat the shewbread as well. And if the regular priests were allowed to eat the shewbread, then you could perhaps extend it to say that the future king who had already been anointed would be able to eat it if he had a need as well. I don't know. The whole thing is shoebread for your thoughts, I guess. One other interesting thing is when it talks about how the priests profane the Sabbath. That's kind of an interesting word. But to profane means to make something common that is sacred. Okay, this one. One moment. We're having technical difficulties.
Okay. The sound quality was poor, so we're just going to switch the sound here. Sorry, we'll have to edit this out later. I was trying to fix it without messing things up, but mess things up. Hold on just a minute. And let's see. You're good.
Okay, continuing. Hopefully the audio is good. Somebody tell me in the chat if it's better. We did change something, and I know I kind of am talking quietly. I'm sorry. I'm not great at talking loud for a long time. Okay, so profane, when it talks about the priest in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless, so to profane something is to make something sacred common. And so you're using holy things for everyday uses. We're good? Okay. So they're profaning the Sabbath. They're doing what they do every day, offering the daily offering and stuff like that. So just a little note. All right. So yes. So the Pharisees were guilty of condemning many things as work, and therefore as being forbidden on the Sabbath, that were not work, or at least not work for everybody. One good example of this is found in John 5, where Christ comes to a man at the side of the pool of Bethesda who had an infirmity 38 years and had never been able to be healed because he could not walk. And so whenever the water was troubled by an angel, of course tradition holds that the angel who had troubled the waters was Raphael, the angel of healing, whose name means God heals, somebody else would enter the water before he could. Christ heals him and tells him to rise, take up thy bed and walk. So John 5, 9 through 10 reads, there we go. And immediately the man was made whole and took up his bed and walked. And on the same day was the Sabbath. Okay. The Jews therefore said unto him that was cured, it is the Sabbath day, it is not lawful for thee to carry thy bed. So they assumed, incorrectly in my opinion, that carrying his bed would be work for that man. If I know that if I have been crippled for 38 years, all I would want to do would be to walk, or to run, or to jump, something. The last thing I would want to do would be sit and do what most people would consider resting. Personally, I think the key here is variety. They say a change is as good as a rest, but I'm just going to say a change is a rest, depending on what you're doing for the change. So fishing is, of course, work for a fisherman. So it seems reasonable to say that as per Exodus 28 through 11, which are the verses that talk about the Sabbath, I would say that he should not fish on the Sabbath. But what of a blacksmith who fishes as a hobby for his own pleasure? I would say that he should not blacksmith on the Sabbath, but he could fish should he so desire. For him, fishing would not be work, but rather a kind of rest. For a man who had not been able to walk for the almost last 4 decades, walking would be a kind of rest, and I think that Christ understood that. So the next time we see Christ rebuke the Pharisees is in Matthew 15, which is also Mark's. So it says, then came to Jesus scribes and Pharisees which were of Jerusalem, saying, why do thy disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they wash not their hands when they eat bread. But he answered and said unto them, why do ye also transgress the commandment of God by your tradition? For God commanded, saying, honor thy father and mother, and he that curses father or mother, let him die the death. So the tradition of the elders is what is called the oral Torah, which consists of a series of traditions, including Talmud, supposedly given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai at the same time as the written law, which were not written down until about 70 AD, following the destruction of the Second Temple, for fear that Jewish culture would be destroyed or forgotten. Or I said, they're written down because of the fear that Jewish culture would be destroyed or forgotten because the temple had been destroyed. So, but he answered and said unto them, why do ye, oh, sorry, I already read that. Okay, so this is a quote from 2 chapters in Torah, Exodus 20:12, which is also Deuteronomy 5:16, and Exodus 21:17, which is also Leviticus 29. So at the Exodus one, it says, honor thy father and thy mother, that the days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, which is, of course, from the 10 Commandments. And then, sorry, one second, I need to turn the page on my notes here. And he that curses his father or mother shall surely be put to death. So that's the Exodus 21. Continuing Matthew 15. But ye say, whosoever shall say to his father or his mother, it is a gift, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, and honor not his father or his mother, he shall be free. Thus ye have made the commandment of God of none effect by your tradition. Ye hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you, saying, this people draweth nigh unto me with their mouths, and honoureth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. So, before I go on to this next quotation, talk about the it is a gift thing. Now, I actually didn't know what this was until I did some research for this talk last year, but this is what the People's Bible Notes say from Matthew 15:5. It says, the scribes taught that a Jew, by calling his possessions korban, a gift to God, also this is in Mark 7:11, yes, was absolved from the duty of caring for his parents, even though he did not afterward devote his property to sacred uses. Thus, by an artifice, the law with respect to parents can be set aside. So, basically, part of honoring your parents in a biblical sense is the monetary side of things. And the Pharisees had a tradition that if you say, oh, my property is dedicated to God, even though if you didn't do anything with it that would be cohesive or show that it really was dedicated to God. You say, it's dedicated to God, don't do anything special with it, but then you are absolved from the monetary duties and burdens of your parents. So this is a textbook example of the oral traditions being actually having the effect of breaking the law. It's really strange, because I can understand the purpose for traditions are great as long as you don't ever confuse them with commandments and they don't get elevated to the status of commandments. We have to have traditions because we don't have enough. With some things, there isn't quite enough framework not necessarily enough framework to do it. So we have to kind of say that we're going to do it. We're going to do stuff that isn't in there because it seems to fit and it seems to magnify what we already have. And this is what the Talmud is supposed to be, is traditions to explain the finer points and the things that maybe are a bit confusing, which is great. That's wonderful. But it reached the point where it's no longer we're going to do this to magnify the law, or we're going to do this to prevent us from breaking the commandments even. So it's gone even farther than a hedge. We're doing this thing and it's actually ended up breaking the commandments. This is the whole idea of a Shabbos goy, which is like you can't do work on the Sabbath, and they of course they explode that to mean so many. You can't turn on a light switch, and you can't heat up your food, and you can't walk you can't drive a car, you can't do all these things. But if you have somebody who's not a Jew who's in your house, they can do stuff for you. They can turn on the lights, they can heat up your food, which is explicitly forbidden. It says, or the stranger that is within your gates. Like you're not supposed to have stuff like this. But they say, oh, well, it can't be. You can't directly ask them. You don't say, would you please turn on the light? You say, oh, it's getting kind of dark in here. And then your Shabbos goy turns on the lights for you. And that is, you've come so far around that you're back to breaking the commandments. Anyway, moving on. So this quote is from Isaiah 29:13, which reads, Wherefore Yahweh said, Forasmuch as this people draw near me with their mouth, and with their lips do honor me, but have removed their heart far from me, their fear toward me is taught by the precept. So chronologically, the next example we have of Jesus rebuking the Pharisees using the law is recorded in John 8 with the story of the woman taken in adultery. So as an interesting side note, there seems to be some controversy over whether this portion of the chapter was a part of John's original manuscript or was added later. I have heard that while many older Greek manuscripts do not include it, some of the Hebrew ones do. I don't know. According to BibleSociety.org, St. Augustine said this passage was originally left out of the earliest Greek manuscripts by, and I quote, men of little faith, close quote, because they thought it showed Jesus condoning adultery. All right, so the story begins. Jesus went into the Mount of Olives. And early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all the people came unto him, and he sat down and taught them. And the scribes and Pharisees brought unto him a woman taken in adultery, and when they had set her in the midst, they said unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned, but what sayest thou? So they are, of course, referring to Leviticus 20:10, which says, And the man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even he that committeth adultery with his neighbour's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. Continuing John 8. And this they said, tempting him, that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground as though he heard them not. So when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. Sorry. And they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. So there is much speculation over what Jesus wrote on the ground here. So there's a list of ideas. This is from BibleSociety.org again. So St. Augustine thought that writing in the ground, Jesus was establishing himself as a lawgiver, echoing what God did writing the Ten Commandments on tablets of stone. St. Jerome thought he was writing a list of the woman's accusers as with reference to Jeremiah 17:13, which says, O Lord, the hope of Israel, all who forsake thee shall be put to shame. Those who turn away from thee shall be written in the earth, for they have forsaken Yahweh, the fountain of living water. And actually, interesting thing about Jeremiah 17:2 is that the first verse says, the sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron. So he's accusing them of being sinful and from turning away from the Lord. This is one theory. Others think he was writing the sins of his accusers, shaming them with his knowledge of what they had done. So, I personally, actually, I'm going to finish this. So another idea is that he was echoing Roman law, writing firstly her crime, adultery, and secondly her sentence, death, but the words were temporary, scuffed out by the feet of her accusers as they shuffled away. So it becomes an emblem of forgiveness because sins aren't written in concrete but in dust. So these are some ideas from BibleSociety.org. I personally have another idea that I heard a while back, but for a second, I just want to talk about one of them, which is the people thinking that he's writing the sins of her accusers in the dust and shaming them with his knowledge of what they'd done. I personally do not like this because of my Mormon background. So there is a talk Joseph Smith gave, the Try the Spirits talk, and he talks about how if somebody claims to have knowledge of a sin somebody else has committed by only divine means, that alone is not sufficient evidence. So somebody can't say, I was visited by an angel and I know that Mr. Smith over here committed murder. And you can't go and execute Mr. Smith on that sort of evidence. It's not solid enough. You have to have something else. So even if Jesus did know their sins, which he probably did through divine means, I don't really like it because I don't feel like that's not enough evidence to accuse him. So this actually ties in a little bit later. So 1 second. I think my notes have gone out of order here. One moment. Okay, here we go. So this is my idea, or not my idea original, but it's an idea that I heard a couple years ago, and I think it stuck with me. So if you remember what Leviticus 20:10b says, sorry, okay, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. So both of them, the man and the woman. And the scribes and Pharisees had only brought the woman, but if they caught her in the very act, then surely the man was there as well. And where was the man? So remember verse 6. There it is. They are baiting him. They're making it difficult to try to make him slip up and say one thing or the other. And they're making the situation more complicated by bringing only half the guilty party. So if he had said stone her, they would have probably, at least I assume, accused him of attempting to undermine the authority of the Romans, and maybe would have gotten executed on that. And if he had said spare her, they could have accused him of blaspheming the law, and maybe would have got him ostracized, or maybe even executed for that. But he was wiser than them all. So instead of saying yea or nay, he calmly and collectively picked their trap to pieces. So he bent down and wrote in the dust. So this is, of course, theory. We can't know, but I think this is interesting. So the theory says that first, the law concerning adultery. So this would be Leviticus 20:10, or part of it. And this is supposedly what the priests would do. If you brought somebody to the temple and accused them, they'd write the law that they were accused of breaking in the dust of the temple courtyard. But it didn't have to be the temple courtyard. It just had to be somewhere temporary. So then the second time, so it says in verse 8 here, and again he stooped down and wrote on the ground, where is the man? Verse 9 says, and they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. So they've been convicted by their own conscience. They've violated, they hate Jesus so much that they have violated the law, attempting to trap him. The law says you bring both the adulterer and the adulteress and you stone them together. They only brought the adulteress, which means that they have broken the law. And he's called them out on this, and he says their consciences convicted them. So, continuing the chapter. So when Jesus had lifted himself up and saw none but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are those thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? She said, No man, Lord. Jesus said to her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. So some people point to the conclusion of the story, and use it as an example of the mercy of Jesus. And while this may be true, his saying, Neither do I condemn thee, does not necessarily come from a point of mercy. So under the law, there are strict rules about witnesses. So it says, Where are those thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? So it is a strongly emphasized point in the Torah that in order for punishment to be meted out, especially capital punishment, which is the punishment for adultery, there must be at least two witnesses. This is Deuteronomy 19:5, Deuteronomy 17:6. If someone sinned or committed a crime but had fewer than two accusers, then nothing would be done. I don't think so. Or if there are contradicting witnesses, that would also complicate things. So she says, No man, Lord, and Jesus says, Neither do I condemn thee, go and sin no more. But so people, like I said, I'm sorry, I'm repeating it myself here, but people point to this as an example of the mercy of Jesus. But under the law, he could not be a witness against her because he had not seen her sin. And this is again going back to the Tried Spirits lecture, which was, by the way, published in the Times and Seasons on April 1st, 1842. So, and this is a quote from it actually. It says, No person through the discerning of spirits can bring a charge against another, but they must be proven guilty by positive evidence, or they stand clear. So Jesus undoubtedly knew of her guilt, but it made a difference because he had not seen her sin, so he could not testify against her. And this aspect of the law leads to some interesting consequences. So, for example, in Genesis chapter 4, directly after Cain killed Abel, Jehovah comes to him. And Jehovah said unto Cain, Where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground. And now thou art accursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. I remember wondering why the Lord did not just strike Cain dead where he stood. He was obviously guilty. Jehovah knew it. Abel's blood was crying up from the ground. But I heard a theory on why that made me think more, even if the theory may or may not be correct. There were not two witnesses. Now the earth was one, but there was not another one. So of course, actually, one sec. Let me grab a drink. Sorry, I'll be talking. Okay. So of course, witnesses or no, there will be justice on Judgment Day, when all the secret things will be made known and the hidden things made bare. But witnesses are required for justice and punishment on earth. Yahweh plays by his own rules. That, in fact, was one of the revolutionary things about Hebrew theology. Before the Hebrews, all or nearly all societies believed in more than one god, and these gods were, by and large, unpredictable and capricious. The gods of the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Persians, the Babylonians, the Mesopotamians, and all the rest of them were fickle and subject to moods and whims that would completely determine, or nearly completely determine, how they treated mankind, or so the myths went. But the God of the Hebrews is different, is different. He gave his people his laws at Mount Sinai and made a covenant with them. And they were bound by the covenant, but so was he. They were expected to do certain things, and they could expect him to do certain things. It was a two-way thing. And yes, sometimes Yahweh became angry with his people. This is Numbers 11, Numbers 32. There's a bunch of other references I have. But even when he was angry, he wasn't like, zap, you're dead, zap, zap, you're dead. So there are some, of course, examples of this, like Nadab and Abihu, or like, his name escapes me at the moment, but the man who studied the ark. But his anger and whatever the consequences of it were always just. So even when he did become angry, and even if in his anger he was harsher than he had been, that was only because he had been being merciful and then had started being purely just. Even in his anger, he was never unjust, which is amazing. So in John chapter 10, there's another good example of Jesus using the Old Testament to rebuke the Jews. Some context here, Jesus was at the temple during Hanukkah, Feast of Dedication, and the Jews asked him to tell them plainly if he was the Messiah, the Son of God. He responds by saying that if they do not know that he is the Messiah, it is because they are not his sheep. Then the Jews took up stones to stone him. And Jesus answered them, Many good works have I showed you from my Father. For which of these works do ye stone me? The Jews answered him, saying, For a good work we stone thee not, but for blasphemy, and because that thou, being a man, makest thyself God. Jesus answered them, Is it not written in your law, I said, ye are gods? The quotation here is from Psalm 82:6, which reads, I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. In Psalm 82, God is speaking to the judges and the magistrates of Israel, rebuking them for their abuse of power and their general wickedness. They are called gods because in their office they would determine the fate of other men. Jesus continues his answer. If he called them gods unto whom the word of God came, and the scripture cannot be broken, say ye of him whom the Father hath sanctified and sent into the world, Thou blasphemest, because I said, I am the Son of God? If I do not the works of my Father, believe me not. Okay, one sec, actually. So, sorry, back into verse 36. Thou, say ye of him whom the Father hath sanctified and sent into the world, Thou blasphemest, because I said, I am the Son of God. So, this is the way that an educated rabbi would debate with other educated rabbis. He argues that since men are called gods in the law, and in this case the law is more than just the 5 books of Moses and refers to the whole Old Testament, and that the scripture cannot be broken, or cannot be incorrect, it is not blasphemy for him to call himself the Son of God. This is backed up even more by Psalm 82:6b, which of course reads, And all of you are children of the Most High. Most likely the Jews he was debating with knew the Old Testament well enough. His quotation of the first half of the verse would have likely brought to mind the second half. The second half, which literally says that Jesus and everyone else are sons and daughters of God. Quite a powerful argument, if you ask me. So the section concludes with the end of Jesus' arguments, and then the Jews try to take him, but he escapes. So verse 37, I do not the works of my Father, believe me not. But if I do, though ye believe not me, believe the works, that ye may know and believe that the Father is in me and I in him. Therefore they sought again to take him, but he escaped out of their hand. This is fun. This is fun. Okay, so Luke 13. So moving on to the next. Okay, moving on to the next instance of this. So one moment. Okay, so the next instance chronologically of Jesus using the law to rebuke the Jews is in Luke 13. One moment. Come on. Okay. Okay, there we go. So, the same day there came certain of the Pharisees, saying unto him, Jesus, get thee out and depart hence, for Herod will kill thee. And he said unto them, go ye and tell that fox, behold, I cast out devils, and I do cures today and tomorrow, and the third day I shall be perfected. Nevertheless, I must walk today and tomorrow, and the day following, for it cannot be that a prophet perish out of Jerusalem. Sorry, I'm trying to write on my notes. Okay. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, which killest the prophets, and stonest them that are sent unto thee! How often would I have gathered thy children together, as a hen doth gather her brood under her wings, and ye would not. Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. And verily I say unto you, ye shall not see me, until the time come when ye shall say, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord, or Jehovah. The quotation from Psalm 118:26. It says, blessed be he that cometh in the name of Jehovah. We have blessed you out of the house of Jehovah. Indeed, Jerusalem did see him and say, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord, in Matthew 21. And they, which is the disciples, brought the ass and the colt, and put on them their clothes, and they set him thereon. And him is Jesus. And a very great multitude spread their garments in the way, and others cut down branches from the trees and strawed them in the way. And the multitudes that went before and that followed cried, saying, Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he that cometh in the name of Jehovah! Hosanna in the highest. My notes have gone out of order again. Okay, there we go. And when he was come into Jerusalem, all the city was moved, saying, Who is this? And the multitude said, This is Jesus the prophet of Nazareth of Galilee. And Jesus went into the temple of God, and cast out all them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers, and the seats of them that sold doves. And he said unto them, It is written, My house shall be called the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves. This is a quote from Isaiah 56:7, and possibly Jeremiah 7:11. So Isaiah 56:7 reads, Even them will I bring to my holy mountain, and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices shall be accepted upon mine altar. For mine house shall be called a house of prayer for all people. Jeremiah 7:11 reads, Is this house, the temple, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your eyes? Matthew 21 continues, And the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. And when the chief priests and scribes saw the wonderful things that he did, and the children crying in the temple and saying, Hosanna to the Son of David, they were sore displeased, and said unto him, Hearest thou what these say? And Jesus saith unto him, Yea, have ye never read, Out of the mouth of babes and sucklings thou hast perfected praise? Psalm 8:2 reads, Out of the mouths of babes and sucklings hast thou ordained strength because of thine enemies, that thou mightest still the enemy and the avenger. So the passage concludes, and he left them and went out of the city unto Bethany and lodged there. So further along in Matthew 21, the chief priests and elders came to Jesus and asked him from where his authority came. He answers them with the parable of the two sons and the parable of the wicked tenants, and then with a quotation from Psalms, the same psalm, in fact, from which the Hosanna shouts of the multitude had come from during the triumphal entry. Jesus said unto them, Did ye never read in the Scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected, the same is become the head of the corner? This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. This is from Psalm 118, which says, The stone which the builders rejected, or refused, is become the headstone of the corner. This is Jehovah's doing, it is marvelous in our eyes. So Jesus continues, Therefore I say unto you, the kingdom of God shall be taken from you, and given to a nation bringing forth the fruits thereof. And whosoever shall fall on this stone shall be broken, but on whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind him to powder. And when the chief priests and Pharisees had heard his parables, they perceived that he spake of them. But when they sought to lay hands on him, they feared the multitude, because they took him for a prophet. Okay, moving on. Matthew 22, which is Mark 12, is just full of examples of the Pharisees and the Sadducees trying to catch Jesus in his own words and failing each and every time. So the first one, while it might not strictly belong in this talk because Jesus did not quite quote the Old Testament in reply to the Pharisees, it's interesting enough that I'll include it anyway. One moment. All right. So, sorry. Okay. Then went the Pharisees and took counsel how they might entangle him, which is Jesus, in his talk. And they sent out unto him their disciples with the Herodians, saying, Master, we know that thou art true, and teachest the way of God in truth. Neither carest thou for any man, for thou regardest not the person of men. Tell us therefore, what thinkest thou? Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not? Now, this is a very tricky question. And it even says in, took counsel how they might entangle him. So that this is a trap. So if Jesus had remained silent, they would have reproached him for not being the open, honest man they had said he was, who didn't care what anybody else thought. So, Master, we know that thou art true, and teachest the way of God in truth. Neither carest thou for any man, for thou regardest not the person of men. And he had said that, yes, it was lawful to give tribute to Caesar. They most likely would have accused him of having Roman sympathies, and would have likely construed his words and caused many of his followers to leave, since the prevailing opinion among the Jews of the time was that they should be their own nation and not be subject to Roman rule. And if he had said that paying tribute to Caesar was unlawful, then they would have probably accused him to the Romans of spreading sedition and rebellion and all that fun stuff, and got him executed. Luckily, he saw through their trap. Now, okay. But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, Why tempt ye me, ye hypocrites? Show me the tribute money. And they brought unto him a penny. And he saith unto them, Whose is this image and superscription? So here on screen I have a picture of a denarius, which is what would have been called a penny, from the reign of Tiberius Caesar, which is probably what they brought to him. But it doesn't really matter if it isn't exactly, because the majority of probably whatever coin it was of a similar nature, so it doesn't really matter much. But so, okay, so brought him a penny, says unto him, Whose is this image and superscription? So this coin on the front side has a picture of Tiberius Caesar, crowned with laurels, and the inscription reads, and I believe it's in Greek or Latin, I guess it's probably Latin, but the translation is Tiberius Caesar, divine son of Augustus. On the back of it is a depiction of what is probably the Roman goddess Pax, and the inscription reads Pontiff Maximus, which means the Most High Priest. So this is a blasphemous Roman coin, and here's something that's kind of interesting, is that the traditions of the Pharisees, that touching a coin with the image of a man on it made you unclean. Now they just come out of the temple. So, and they brought him this coin. So here's something. So Augustus, so Tiberius Caesar, divine son of Augustus. Augustus means majestic, and it has lots of religious connotations. So, from a Hebrew perspective, this is a blasphemous coin. It is a man setting himself up as divine, the son of God, and it's got this goddess, Roman goddess on the back, says the Most High Priest. So they say unto him, Caesar's. So whose image is this? It's Caesar's. And then there's, of course, the superscription part, which we don't normally talk about so much. And then he saith unto them, Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. And when they had heard these words, they marveled and left him and went their way. So the kind of the context here is that if they were strictly following, these Pharisees were all too happy to collect this blasphemous Roman silver and make themselves rich off of it. But, and this is, you could potentially say this is in violation of the second commandment because it's an image, a graven image with religious connotation, not saying this is God. So they were all too happy to collect this blasphemous silver, but then when it came time to pay taxes, they all of a sudden had scruples. And they're like, oh no, we can't do that. We can't pay taxes to Caesar. We can't have allegiance to Caesar. We're gods. We're Israelites, which is the hypocrite part of things. So anyway, all right. So the chapter continues with a similar story. So it says the same day came to him, which is of course Jesus, the Sadducees, which say that there is no resurrection, and asked him. Sorry, one moment. Saying, Master, Moses said, if a man die having no children, his brother shall marry his wife and raise up seed unto his brother. So actually one thing which I want to talk about here is the Sadducees, which believe that there was no resurrection. And this is going to come into play a little bit later. This was one of the major differences between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. There was lots of other ones too, but one of them is that the Pharisees believed in a resurrection and the Sadducees didn't. So this, marry his wife and raise up seed to his brother is of course referring to the law of Levirate, which one place where it is in Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 6, which says, if brethren dwell together, and one of them die and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry without unto a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in unto her, and take her to him to wife, and perform the duty of an husband's brother unto her. And it shall be that the firstborn which she beareth shall succeed in the name of his brother which is dead, that his name be not put out of Israel. So, of course, this is the law of Levirate, and it was fairly common practice at the time, not just among the Israelites, but also in parts of India, Persia, etc., in which if a married man died with no children, his oldest living brother was to take his widow as a wife, and her first son would count in the eyes of the law as a child of the dead man, inheriting his property and carrying on his name. This brother could refuse, but it would bring disgrace on his house, and then the widow could call upon her husband's other brothers or even her father-in-law or other male relatives to fulfill the duty of a husband's brother. So the two most famous examples of this, probably the story in Genesis 13 with Judah and his daughter-in-law Tamar. Interesting note is that this is the story of Judah and Tamar happens hundreds of years before the giving of the law on Mount Sinai, showing that the law of Levirate was in practice then as well before Mount Sinai. And then the other big example is Ruth and Boaz. And that is kind of interesting because it's not her husband's brother. Her husband's brother's dead. And it's not her father-in-law either because he's dead too. So it's Boaz, who is a relative of some sort. Some people say that he was Elimelech's brother. I don't know, but anyway, okay. So the Sadducees continue. Now there were with us 7 brethren, and the first, when he had married a wife, deceased, and having no issue, left his wife unto his brother. Likewise the second also, and the third unto the 7th. And last of all the woman died also. Therefore in the resurrection, whose wife shall she be of the 7? For they all had her. Jesus answered and said unto them. So one thing which is interesting to note is that this is a trick question again. So say, therefore, in the resurrection, whose wife shall she be of the 7? For they all had it. This is posed by Sadducees who don't believe in the resurrection. So it is a hypothetical question for them, and they're just trying to create a situation where it will be a trap and a difficult question to answer intentionally. It's not difficult because there's a paradox or something deep, but difficult because of the trickery and kind of the wordplay and stuff like that. So Jesus answered and said unto them, Ye do err, not knowing the scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven. But as touching the resurrection of the dead, so now he's like, well, this is what I think about the resurrection, but here's what he's addressing their views of the resurrection and how it isn't a thing. So, but as touching the resurrection of the dead, have you not read that which was spoken unto you by God, saying, I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. So this is a quote from Exodus 3:6. It says, moreover he, which is Jehovah, said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. This is, of course, in the burning bush. So this is an extraordinary argument, which simply and logically put goes like this. Jehovah is the Lord of the living only, but since he is the God of Abraham, Abraham must be living in the eyes of Jehovah. This has beautiful and comforting ties to the parable of the vine recorded in John 15. Jehovah the vine is immortal and living. We the branches must likewise be immortal and living. In some respect, obviously we are mortal, we die, but some part of us, the soul, is immortal and live in the resurrection. Okay, so you recall, of course, the Sadducees say there's no resurrection. So this is kind of debunking their claim, I guess. So, continuing the chapter, says, but when the Pharisees had heard that he had put the Sadducees to silence, they were gathered together. So, the Sadducees had no response to that. He had just shown them from their own scriptures how a large part of their belief structure was wrong. So, what do you really say when somebody does that? So it says, and then one of them, which was a lawyer, asked him a question, tempting him and saying, Master, which is the great commandment in the law? So again, this is a trap. It's a lawyer, so what else can you expect? One moment. Come on. Oh, there we go. Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love Jehovah thy God with all thine heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind. This is, of course, from the Shema, which is one of the most sacred prayers in Judaism, which was given in Deuteronomy 6, which is, Hear, O Israel, Jehovah our God is one Jehovah, and thou shalt love Jehovah thy God with all thine heart and with all thy soul and with all thy might. And interesting to note is that the account of this incident recorded in Mark 12, Jesus starts with the very beginning, the Hear, O Israel, part of the Shema. And the Shema continues, and these words which I command thee this day shall be in thy heart. Thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thine hand, and they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes, and thou shalt write them upon the posts of thy house and on thy gates. Jesus continues, This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like unto it, which is, Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. So some people claim that love thy neighbor as thyself, or the golden rule, is a revolutionary Jesus original. So this was something that was against the law, and this is like the new law, and this is revolutionary. It's amazing. But this is also a quotation from the law, from Leviticus 19. I'll get back to that in a minute. So, in a way, these two commandments, as Jesus said, the second is like unto it, are really one commandment. Matthew 25:40 reads, And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. Loving one's neighbor resembles loving God more than anything else, except for loving God, much in the same way that the moon resembles the sun more than the stars do. So as Jesus said, it is like unto it. So this is the quote from Leviticus 19:18, which says, Thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am Jehovah. Matthew 22 continues, On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. While the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them. So I think he'd grown tired of being quizzed by all these men trying to trap him, and so just had to ask them some questions first. So, so Jesus asked the Pharisees, saying, What think ye of Christ? Whose son is he? They say unto him, The son of David. He saith unto them, How then doth David in spirit call him Lord, saying, Jehovah said unto my Lord, Sit thou on my right hand, till I make thine enemies my footstool. This is a quotation from Psalm 110:1. It says, Yehovah said unto my Lord, sit thou at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool. This is a messianic psalm. And one of the interesting things is that later in this, in verse 4, is where it talks about how Yeshua is a priest after the order of Melchizedek, which talks about in Hebrews 7:2. All right. So Matthew 22, continuing. If David then call him Lord, how was he his son? So, and no man was able to answer him a word, neither durst any man from that day forth ask him any more questions. The final verse of Isaiah 54 says, no weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment thou shalt condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of Jehovah, and the righteousness is of me, saith Yahweh. What more can be said? Soli Deo Gloria. And that is the end of my talk. All right. Now what? Questions?
Comment section.
All right. Should I let people mute themselves or? All right.
Well, that's up to you.
Whoa. Okay. Maybe it's not behaving. Okay. I don't know. Okay.
Go ahead and scroll through.
All right. One moment. I will. Okay. All right. So let me. If you have a question, put it in the comments. So the chat, I guess. Yes. I do not know if title of Son of God was applied to anybody but Yeshua correctly. That's what I couldn't tell you. So regarding the snake, it was not put up as a god. This was a commandment, and they did this by commandment of God, and it was destroyed later because it was becoming an idol, but it was not originally made to be an idol, and it also wasn't made to be an idol. It wasn't saying, this is the divine snake who brought you out of Egypt. These are your gods, O Israel. And I don't know that putting an image on a coin necessarily breaks the commandments, but this is what the Pharisees believed. So, let's see. Yes. I don't know. Is there anything else, or this maybe might be the end? So let's see. Do I have? Let's see. Shall make upon thee any graven image of anything that is in heaven above, or that in the earth beneath, that is under the waters under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, Jehovah thy God, am a jealous God. So, well, it doesn't state in the scriptures what the Pharisees believed. This is extra stuff that talks about Jewish culture at the time. Although they almost certainly would have agreed that the second commandment would have forbidden idols. And so this is hypocrisy, as it says. So I guess where it says that it is what the Pharisees believed is when Jesus calls them hypocrites, which implies that they are saying one thing and doing another. So they'd say that you shouldn't do this, but are doing it anyway, which implies that they believe that you, or profess to believe that you shouldn't have idols. Yes, the temple coin had an image on it too. One of the things, well, I don't know if they're supposed to originally be temple coins. This is one theory about why the money changers were a problem and why he went in and turned over their tables. They were obviously corrupt, but potentially one of the things is that they were trading money for these blasphemous Roman coins with images on it. I do not have a source from the Talmud. Like I said, the reason I think that that is what they believe is because Jesus calls them hypocrites, which, you know, so they would profess to believe something that would contradict with what they were doing. All right. Okay. I think that's about it, and I think I'll go ahead and end. Have we seen the moon? Have we looked for the moon? Is it up yet? All right. Okay.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and thank you, Zoe, for sharing that with us again. So I will just end with again just a thank you for everyone, and blessings to you all, blessings to all of Israel, wherever you are in your journey. Hopefully, we can all draw closer to God and do as the commandments say, to love God with all our heart, might, minds, strength, and to love our neighbors as ourselves. Those are much easier said than done, but that is the challenge faced before us. May God help us to do that. So until next time, blessings to everyone, and have a good night and a good month.